From the wettest summer since records began, we are sitting on the Wiggly sofa at Blakemere. So we're going to talk a little bit about floods. That sound
Phil's covered in
toast. And that sound is Toast licking her daddy.
Nice. So where's Toast just been licking?
And we're very glad to see Jam back, because last weekend Jam had a little bit of a problem and was very proper poorly. So Jam is back with us on the Wiggly sofa, and poorly no more. I'm Heather from Wiggly Wigglers, and I'm joined today by...
Richard from Wiggly Wigglers.
And Farmer Phil.
Okay, we're recording this on July the 26th, so the day after my birthday.
How old were you this year?
43.
Oh!
And so it should be in the middle of harvest. Phil?
Well, we have started, but we are currently, as many of our listeners will know, and by the time they listen to this, hopefully will be but a distant memory, enjoying the wettest July since records began, the wettest summer since anybody can ever remember. Half the country's been flooded out and the other half have been washed away. And we've got silage bales rolling around in crops of wheat, and we've got silage bales duffing bridges out on the rivers, and it's all sort of carnage all about. But of course it has quite serious implications that if this weather continues from this point for any significant time, the supplies of food are going to be affected. And we've already seen prices going up. We've seen thousands of acres literally under floodwater, and most, if not all, of those crops will be a total loss. So that root crops and salad crops grown on the fertile floodplains near the rivers, they will be complete write-offs. Cereal crops, they've been battered by the storms, they've been flattened by the rain, and wind is significant at this time of year. That's one thing that we've escaped so far, but any significant wind now with these crops that are already beaten up, they're going to be in problems. We've had hailstorms stripping oilseed rape from the crop, completely wipe out the crop, no crop at all.
Yeah, but won't this mean that the prices will go up, so you'll be well away as a farmer, because you've always gone on about how you want food prices to go up so that people value the food more?
That's very true, and I am the first to say that I'm a big fan of market forces and prices going up. But if you fail to get your crop at all, or your crop has been 100% written off by the river or a hailstorm, it doesn't matter what the price is, there's nothing there. So that it's potentially quite serious. There are knock-on effects, so that if we fail to get some of our crops, we're going to be short of forage and litter for the cattle in the winter. And obviously then if we've got to buy it in, it's going to be very expensive. So then there's a decision, do we keep the cattle if we can't afford the litter or the forage to feed them? And all these sorts of decisions. The NFU have started a fodder exchange designed to try and help farmers overcome this, to let people know where fodder is that people want to sell and where people want to buy it.
I know we said this before, but explain the word fodder.
Fodder is...
Fodder!
Loosely describes pretty much any hay or straw type material that animals use. Mostly eat, but obviously for those of us who use it as bedding underneath them, that as well. From my point of view, I've got to say that luckily, so far, we are right at the beginning of harvest. We haven't escaped, and the grass seed crops particularly are looking a little the worse for wear. We've got some cereal crops that are a bit beaten up, but if the weather picks up from here on in, we will come off a lot better than some. And there are some really terrible disaster stories emerging, particularly from the river valleys, where people's whole livelihood for this year has gone. That's it, end of it.
I'm sorry to be so dismal, but we've already had one farmer who is in complete crisis, who we've passed on to the Rural Stress Network, and there is a Farm Crisis Network number nationally, which is 0700 232 6326. So if you do know anybody that is in a proper pickle, then get them to phone that number, because there is some help out there. And farmers around here, I know at the moment, we have witnessed a particular pickle that they are getting themselves into in terms of stress and worry. So
it's nerve-wracking times, because it's at the beginning of harvest. We've, by and large, got very little, if anything, in the store, so that our revenue position potential at the moment is naught. To have weather as bad as this, as soon as this in the harvest, is quite a nerve-wracking experience.
Also, it does affect your soul, doesn't it, Rich?
Yeah, it does.
Wiggly Wigglers, it's like...
Well, I come in the mornings and I'm always conscious of coming in and being all bright and cheery and stuff like that, because you don't want to drag everyone down, amidst your own misery. But I'm struggling so much with this weather. In winter, I struggle with winter anyway because it's dark and these short days and everything else. So difficult. But what can you do? You think, I'll make the most of it. I'll just get out there in the rain, which you can do if it's occasional. If there's the odd wet day, well, that's fine. We need them. But when it's day after day after day of rain, you can't believe it. I wake up in the morning on a summer's morning, and I think, my God, it's raining again. I get out there and I'm wet. In fact, my shoulders are wet now as I sit here.
My feet are wet.
We went walking about yesterday, wet trousers.
Yeah.
God, blimey.
And from Wiggly Wiggler's point of view, the floods has meant that we haven't been able to get orders out for 4 days. Which has been particularly difficult.
Calamity.
And I think the Royal Mail are out to get us because they are having strikes which last 3 weeks. But it's very clever striking.
Right.
Because what they've done is they've done localised striking. So that means you send out your products, but one of the depots is shut.
Yeah.
Which, of course, disrupts everything.
Yeah.
And they take it in turn. So sort it out, loves. Hey? Sort it out. Have a little chat, Alan. Little chat, go round, see our postman Keith with his shorts on, and have a little chat, sort it out, because we really like our post to be getting to the customers.
Yeah, for sure.
Now then, let's go and cheer ourselves up with the Monty Pigcast.
Monty's Pigcast, a weekly fact on pigs. Some breeds of pigs are special or rare because there are not many of them. 2 rare breeds of pigs are large blacks and Tamworths. We've got these on our farm.
Thank you, Monty. Now, on the subject of pigs, we've got 2 bits of feedback from Podchef, and he's at www.kitchengardenfoods.com. The first is just a little quip at Phil, and the second is very serious news. So, here we are. How come, Farmer Phil, you brought your cattle trailer for just 3 piggies? Surely you could have put them in the back of the truck. When I brought our pigs home, we packed them into a nice little crate built for turkeys. They rode the journey home quite snug. I've even had them in the back of my station wagon in a crate. There is no need to rack up the pork miles, towing a trailer and such like. This is from an American. Right. When I went to America, have you seen the size of the average American's truck?
Yeah.
What is he thinking? Does he think that we drive around in 6-litre gas guzzlers? And do they ever put anything in the back of their pickups? They never do. I was in LA.
Shotguns.
Shotguns. I was in LA, which is a town, isn't it? LA, definitely a town.
Yeah.
And I swear to you, 50% of them had pickup trucks.
Right.
And I never saw one single thing in the back of the pickup truck.
Right.
And there is Podchef having a go at poor old Farmer Phil on a rainy day.
Yeah.
It's outrageous.
Golly.
Farmer Phil, give it back to him, babe.
The thing is, I haven't got a back on my truck, so that they, without a crate, as he says, they would have escaped. And it was all right. It was a one-off. If we're going to give the piggies trips out, then we'll do something different, and we'll have a back or whatever. But lighten up, Podchef, eh?
Absolutely.
Yeah, butt out.
Well, if you want to give Farmer Phil a hard time about something, then talk about the brand new combine that he's just bought. Or the huge tractors that he changes every 3 years.
Yeah.
God, come on, concentrate on the real issues here.
They really guzzle some diesel, they do.
How is the new combine, Farmer Phil? I hear that there's dual wheels going on combines.
Back to the wet.
Oh, no. I dug him out of it with a bit of pigginess.
No more wet.
Oh, dismal. Oh, we'll give him, what will we give him, 60 seconds?
Yeah.
Well,
over to you, Phil.
It's not an obvious result of the wet, but quite apart from letting the actual crop dry out to the point that we can harvest it, we then run into problems with the ground conditions underneath it. And so we've been combining some rather soggy barley, not much, I admit, But the problem is that it sinks out of sight, the machinery. And thank you for that, Liberace.
Poor Phil's trying to concentrate and Heather's just ruined the whole thing for him.
Wouldn't be so bad if you played the right notes.
There we are.
Well, there you are.
So anyway, very briefly, I
Phil
heard
hasn't
of
even 60
a
seconds.
tyre supplier up in the north of the country who's currently supplied 70 sets of dual wheels. So Podchef will know all about this because all those good old American boys like dual wheels. And it's extra sets of wheels to put on the outside of the combine wheels to try and give you some flotation to stay on top of the ground. And it's fraught with danger because you get into troubles with broken axles and all sorts. And also combines, although they look massive, they're actually largely tin. And they're very tender things so that you can't pull them easily. There's nothing, they bend and...
Right.
Oh, it's a nightmare. When you get a combine stuck, you've got a big problem.
Yeah.
But touch wood, we've had a couple of instances and there are one or two holes in the field, but we've extricated ourselves from those thus far.
I remember years ago when I was learning to drive a tractor when I was about 16 or something like that.
Wait a minute.
And,
what? You can drive a tractor?
Oh yeah, I can drive tractors.
Oh.
I can drive tractors. I can drive anything, me. But
You can drive me around the bend.
Yeah, absolutely. I do.
After I saw your little
do
red
my
car
best.
that you've just sold, I can see you need to drive anything.
I can't believe you've sold
Driving
that
it.
for money.
That's great. It's a great little car.
It wasn't. It was a Tesco's trolley on wheels.
With some hard currency and the way to go. So, it's a good thing. It's on
It
the road
narrowly
for a little bit
avoided being
longer.
picked up by Quick Skip the other day, who thought it was one of theirs.
Is it safe?
It is safe, yeah. It's perfectly,
got an
it's
MOT?
perfectly good. Yeah, MOT for 6 months. Tax for 6 months.
Did you bribe the man?
No, it was a man and a woman, actually. And interestingly, I did talk
The
about...
MOT man?
He was a green woodworker, so I was talking about possibly some new Wiggly products with him as well.
Yeah, he needed a woodworker with some skill, to put a little bit of tread pattern back in those old tyres.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, a green woodworker?
Green woodworker, yeah. So someone that works
green?
in green wood. So
Oh.
Coppiced wood, sustainable sources of
He's not
wood.
actually
No,
green.
he's not green. No, he wasn't. No, not in the literal sense.
She was
no.
thinking of wood elves and hobgoblins at that point.
Yeah. No. That's no.
He's not green.
It's not green.
What colour was he?
What were we talking about originally? We were talking about something.
Learning to drive a tractor.
Learning to drive a tractor. Yeah, combines. Anyway, because I remember because of course you have to put your foot on the clutch and the brake when you try to stop a tractor, and I remember driving towards
Mostly
a big...
helps with a car as well,
Yeah,
I find.
yeah, but cars do. Yeah, well, but cars will stop if you put your foot on the brake. They won't obviously stall, but they will stop. Whereas, of course, tractors. I mean, things have changed a bit. I'm talking it's 20 years ago now, and I put my foot on the brake, and this poor old tractor, wasn't stopping, and I was heading headlong into this front of the combine harvester, and I thought, oh, that's it, can't stop. Bang! Completely crushed the front of the all the the cutting.
I bet you were popular
The
then.
header.
Oh yeah,
The header.
would have cost him a few quid. Is that what it's called? The
Yeah.
header. Yeah, God.
You had a head-on crash with a combine in the field.
Smashed it. No, it was in the yard. The poor old combine. It was in the yard.
Remind me not to call on Rich for too much help later on in the harvest.
I do
then.
seem to think somewhere I've got a tractor driving proficiency certificate.
I don't think they should have...
I've seen you with a wheelbarrow.
I don't think I've been on a tractor since,
No, probably best.
I've driven one. Anyway.
Jim Fredrickson has just landed on the sofa. Boing! So let's have a word with him.
Welcome back, Jim. You've kindly come along to talk about many things, and certainly the original contribution was talking about nitrous oxide, worms emitting nitrous oxide. One thing you and I talked about, which is really interesting, I think, for the listener, is the problems that people have experienced of large-scale vermicomposting, and the distinction between that and home composting.
Well, that's right. I think I've said before that I've been in this worm business now for 20 or 30 years, and when I first moved into it, I was surprised that there were an awful lot of people setting up quite large-scale worm composting and worm breeding operations. This was something I'd never seen before, and I've kept an eye on it, the whole industry over the last 20 or 30 years, and I'm really, I suppose, saddened by the fact that I've seen so many people buying into these large-scale worm breeding systems, and actually to be frank, losing quite a lot of money as a result of it.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really quite sad that very often people want to diversify in farms, or they have small holdings and they just want a little bit of extra income, and actually buying into some of these worm breeding systems looks a very, very attractive prospect. But do you know, in all of the years that I've been looking at these systems and being called in to investigate these sort of systems, I've never really found a successful operation, one that actually performs the way that the suppliers say they would perform.
Right.
I mean, that's in terms of, for instance, I suppose the big feature of success is how many worms you get out of these systems per year and how much effort it takes to breed them.
That's the crux of the thing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's how it's advertised. You will get 5 billion worms and you'll make so much money.
Exactly. And we've all seen these projections supplied by various manufacturers or suppliers of these systems. And actually, if you follow the figures through, it's quite clear that you could be a millionaire within 2 or 3 years. Now, I don't know that many millionaires in the worm breeding business.
Worm farming, no, not really.
Yes.
No. In fact, I don't know any. Do you know any, Phil?
No, I don't.
You must be close to a millionaire, but it's not off the back of worm farming, is it?
Well, if I am, perhaps you go and tell my bank manager, because he keeps telling me otherwise. But no, it's interesting what Jim says, because I mean, now we've had a number of years' experience sort of all aspects of this industry, and it seems to me that the worm breeding operations that are successful have some other commercial driver.
Yeah.
So the best ones are the Dutch, and the reason for their existence was nothing to do with worms. It was getting rid of mostly animal manure and preventing it polluting the waterways in the very low areas of Holland.
Yeah.
And so that effectively the worms were a byproduct, so that they weren't reliant on the sales of worms, although they are massive businesses, for the whole system to work. The thing was costed on complying with environmental legislation concerning pollution, and the worms were the add-on. And where we've got these firms who tell you that if you put down X square metres of bed, you can produce Y number of worms every year, I don't think I know of one who hasn't sooner or later sold their breeding stock and suddenly realised that production has either tailed right off or ceased completely.
Yeah.
And of course the other problem is the actual picking of the worms. In these highly mechanised, they've had years of experience, particularly in Holland, they know how to do it economically. Whereas on a system in this country, the mechanical systems are quite expensive, and they, if incorrectly used, damage the worms. And picking worms by hand, frankly, is a pretty thankless task. And as you alluded earlier on, Heather has spent some hours in her former life sat on a muck tump picking worms, and it's not really sustainable to do it like that.
No, not at all.
I think the other thing is that theoretically, in those sorts of open-air worm bed systems, you won't actually, because of the high density of worms that you can get in there, you won't actually get worms, say, bigger than a gram that you need to pick in order to make the business work. It's just theoretically not possible for worms to grow to that sort of size whenever they're in there at that sort of density.
I think that's dead right. And also some of the American systems where, again, worms are the byproduct. So, for example, breeding rabbits for meat. They can be quite small-scale operations, and the worms live in the rabbit droppings underneath the cages. Whether or not, the issue of how the rabbits are bred and so on is something completely on its own. But the production of worms is a complete sideline. If there aren't any, you don't sell any.
Yeah.
Once they've bred up, you do. There's no necessity to keep supplying the breeding stock of the worms, and so it's much easier to manage. Those are the systems that work. The ones where you're just, as you say, naturally you're going to pick the biggest worms out of a worm bed, and they, of course, are the ones who are critical because they're the ones laying the eggs and so on.
Absolutely.
So it should be entered into with a lot of caution, I think.
But we probably agree, though, that intensive systems where the Dutch and others in the UK who grow and breed worms in boxes under controlled conditions and using proper stock management systems and so on. They can work pretty well.
Yeah.
They're labour intensive, of course they are, but I've seen people making a reasonable income on that sort of system, but it requires people to be well trained, to take an interest in what's going on, and to follow the life cycle of the worms through and to keep them under perfect conditions. And it's like every other farming process. You've really got to be skilled and trained and know what you're doing.
So what is the distinction then between a large-scale unit, a large-scale system, and then a small-scale can of worms, for instance? Why is it that a can of worms can work perfectly well not in a controlled environment, and a large-scale system doesn't work? Is it purely because the person is trying to get worms, trying to breed worms sufficiently enough to make money out of the volume of worms that they're breeding?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think with the can of worms system, it's fine. It does what it says it does. Yes. Didn't want to say that, but
yeah.
It doesn't really matter how many worms you have in there. They'll just the population will control itself, because that's the way these sorts of systems work. Yeah. So as composting systems, they work absolutely fine. They're really well designed and they're great. But actually breeding worms in the numbers that you need to make an income is incredibly difficult. I mean, people assume that worms are very prolific when it comes to producing offspring, and they're not.
Right.
They're really not. And you need the ideal conditions to keep them. You need ideal temperatures. You need it, about 20 degrees C continuously. You need the right moisture levels. You need the beds to be perfectly aerobic. You need feed material that's highly nutritious, and you need to change that material very often, very frequently, because the food material, loses its nutritional content very, very quickly, and people don't really appreciate that.
Right.
So there are absolutely a number of factors, including density that I said before, to get the sort of worm production that is often quoted by a lot of these suppliers of worm systems. You need to have very low densities. So I suspect that what's happened is that the people who supply worm systems, they take all the most positive and optimistic research data about growth and reproduction from the research that's been produced by people like me and others over the years, in laboratories, I should say, taken all that sort of most optimistic information and translated it into worm outputs per kilogram of waste or per square metre of bed, or however you want to look at it. And I have to say that those worm outputs are only feasible in the laboratory and under ideal conditions, and they simply don't work in the field or in suboptimally run worm systems, even if they're box systems or whatever. You need about half a dozen of these parameters to be kept at optimum levels to get really good worm production. If any of those parameters are suboptimal, like if temperature gets down to 10 degrees rather than 20 degrees C, I mean, these worms are hardly going to produce any offspring at all. And that's very, very well known in the scientific research literature. And there's an awful lot of scientific research literature around, which never finds its way into the popular domain of worm composting. And it's a shame. I mean, I think it is a shame. And I said in one of our other talks that I was a director of the Composting Association. Now, the Composting Association exists to support its members in the industry, so all the big guys, the big waste companies are all members and so on. Right. But there's also another association called the Community Composting Network, which is a fantastic network. I work very closely with them. They support their members very, very well, and people can go to them and talk about these issues and problems. Now, what there isn't, and I think this is a shame, is there isn't a network or support body that looks after worm composters or people interested in producing worms, breeding worms, or doing worm composting. That doesn't really exist. Now, some worm people are obviously members of the CCN or Composting Association, and that's fine. Yeah. But I think what's needed is a body, an association that looks after people who are worm fetishists like myself. And I've been saying this for years.
It's a brave man that's going to admit that he's got a worm fetish.
Well, we've all got these little skeletons in our cupboard. But I think it'd be a really good idea. So maybe this is something that you guys would like to take on.
We could give some serious
I think it's important because I think people specifically who deal with worms need a lot of support. They need a lot of help, and what we need to do is to make sure that people who are thinking of investing into large-scale systems in particular have got the advice that they need, so they know what questions to ask, and that they get the information back from suppliers of these systems that they need to help them make the decisions that they want to make.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely bang on. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Jim.
Well, you were quiet in that interview, weren't you?
Well, I wasn't really here, was I? That's why he landed on the sofa, because we secretly recorded it a bit ago. So anyway, there we are. Tutson then.
Yeah, Tutson. Well, Phil and I and Rob walked around Phil's permanent set-aside yesterday, and when the weather was by and large pretty shocking, but we had some sunny spells, and we counted several species of butterflies. But Rob, he likes his flora especially, and we stumbled across this Hypericum, Tutson it's called, and Rob was just completely enthralled by this thing because it's an indicator species of ancient woodland. It was admittedly quite close to the boundary of the wood, but obviously the set-aside has been left for a reasonable amount of time, sufficient for these species to manage to colonise. So that was great. So, let's have a listen to what Rob thought about it.
Okay, and we'll make it plant of the week. Height up to 80 centimetres, Hypericum androsemum, upright semi-evergreen shrub, oval leaves are borne opposite pairs, yellow flowers, berries ripen red to black. Here we go.
What have you found, Rob? What have you found?
This is Tutson, and this is fantastic, really, because this is an indicator species to ancient woodland or an ancient hedgerow or
really
ancient places. And here we are on the 10-year-old set-aside.
It's beautiful. What does it look like? It's a kind of starry-shaped flower with
it's a Hypericum,
lovely...
and this will be part of the Wiggly wildflower and shrub range come this autumn.
Right.
As it happens.
Does that mean I could sell it?
Yeah, that's right. So we don't need to buy seed from you, Rob. We just come and pick some from Phil's set-aside.
Yeah, just identified myself out of business here. But these fruits, or what appear to be fruits, are just full of tiny seeds. Look, massive.
Look at that. That's amazing. Yeah.
It's a Hypericum, same family as the St. John's wort.
Really? It's gorgeous. And are those berries edible?
No.
So even for different forms of wildlife, or are they just...
To my knowledge, they're not edible. It has a long history of medicinal uses for various different things of what I'm not sure.
Fantastic. There was all sorts. So we've just walked through some musk mallow as well, which is something that's decidedly rare these days.
Yeah,
and yet it's popped its head up here.
One of only 2 places that I know of it growing wild in Herefordshire. Although I don't get round Herefordshire as much as I would like.
Sure.
I can only walk to one other place where I know.
And within, I say 10 years, but it's actually probably longer than that. That has grown on a field. This wasn't a grass field. This was arable. We ploughed this field. You're on the edge of a deciduous woodland. It's not a terribly old piece of woodland, although just further up the hill from here there is evidence of a lot of very old oak stumps that have been sawn off, and the stumps have rotted off the ground, which indicates that it's been woodland for a hell of a long time, and it was probably clear felled. Looking at these oak trees, what do you reckon, Rich? I expect they're probabably 50 years old.
50 years, gotta be,
which sort of fits with the major goings on.
But these have coppiced up, these oak trees have all coppiced up from the stump, so they were probably cut down 40 or 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And then they've grown up. If you look at all the trunks, there's 1 or 2, there's usually 2 or 3 together. And that's where they've been cut down.
And this would indicate that there was a lot of work done on this farm between the wars. So any time from the 30s until sort of immediate post-Second World War, I suppose, which exactly fits date-wise. And then just a little bit further into the wood there is the actual woodland fence, and then within that there is actually a better stand of some planted and some more managed oak woodland, so where they've taken the coppice regrowth from the stump and selected one shoot to grow on into a tree, and that managed it a bit better, thinned it. Whereas these are much more.
They're so much tighter, aren't they? But it's great because it's really interesting. Yeah, I heard a wren in the background. Then it's nice to see that green woodpecker as well. I mean, that's an indication that there should be some healthy ant life around here. I don't know. We haven't bumped into any yellow.
Sessile oak.
Sessile oak, right? How can you tell the difference, Rob?
So sessile oak has the long stalk to the leaf, whereas if we're looking at English oak or Quercus robur, it has no stem to the leaf.
Right.
If there are any acorns here, which there aren't, again, the acorn on the sessile oak has no stalk,
Right.
and on the English oak it has a long stalk, so it's the other way around to the leaf.
Excellent.
Now then, before we leave you for another week, I thought you might like to know that I've been on to the 1 Minute How-To show, and that is 1minutehowto.com, and I'm on there doing how to recycle your kitchen waste with worms. So there we are. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's show. It's still raining here in Blademere. But if you do get a chance, we would love to have a review on iTunes that we can read out, and it just tickles us, doesn't it? It just totally tickles us. And a quick congratulations to Anna Farmery, my co-podcaster at Middle Age Shed and the Podcast Sisters, who's been nominated for this year's Podcast Awards in LA. So hope you win.
For Anna.
I think so. I believe it's the only UK-based business podcast, so I really hope she does well there. And so, anything else to add? Gentlemen.
And the second thing from Podchef was...
Oh, the second thing, the critical thing from Podchef. Let me just go to these emails and see what it was. It's awful news. This is an intervention, says Podchef. I know how addicted to Milka you are, dear heart. This is to me.
That's nice.
But you must end your fondness of it here and now. You must put your money where your Milka is. And then he goes on with some diatribe about the problems that Milka's made by Kraft, and Kraft is owned by Philip Morris, and he's the guy, that the tobacco giant, and all these sorts of things. And what he says is that we need to rethink the chocolate rating based not only on taste, but based on fair trade, ethics,
right,
based on farming, based on...
This is a problem, isn't it? You know, we started our chocolate rating up as a bit of fun, wasn't it? Something very innocent and purely based around the fact
I think there's
one
a simple
tastes better
solution,
than the
team.
other.
There's no issues for me here. If the ethical chocolate manufacturers would like to send us some samples for us to peruse together with their ethical values, that'll do me.
Well, it's not only that, but Podchef has put his money where his mouth is, and he has sent us a whole dose of this most delicious chocolate called Divine.
It is good.
And
It is.
so I suggest that we should, take this further and have a proper chocolate tasting on next week's show.
Right.
With chocolate that I found from Wales called Pemberton's.
Okay.
And that's from the chocolate farm. We've got Divine, we've got Milka, we've got Green and Blacks, and we've got any other chocolate that anyone wants to send in.
Good thinking.
If you want your chocolate reviewed on this show, we need some of it. We better make this in a show in a few weeks, hadn't we? In a show in a few weeks, we need some of it, and we need to know its status in terms of food miles, in terms of ethics, and we'll make our judgment, because there's no way I'm just giving up Milka.
Okay.
No way, until I've checked the whole thing out. And I've actually found that they're actually part of an ethical organisation called Ethisol, I think it is. And so all might not be as it seems to be. So from the Wiggly Sofa this week, thank you very, very much for tuning in. And we will talk to you shortly.
Bye.
Glug, glug, glug. Glug.
Before we finish this week's show, which I've thoroughly enjoyed,
Absolutely.
I thought you might like to know that I'm actually on the 1minutehowto.com shows with George. And I'm doing a how to recycle your kitchen waste with worms in 1 minute. And there's some other corking how minute 1, 2.
How minute 1, 2.
Oh dear. And just a minute, I can't say that.
Just a minute.
Okay, here we go.
Michael's going to take a week to edit this.
No, it's all right.
Yeah,
Okay.
we have gone on. We've been all over the shop. I'm completely
I'm
confused.
totally confused.
I just chip in every now and again with some
Anyway,
whatever I'm
here we
told
are.
to say.
Yeah.
Today I have a bad feeling.
Mary. she tried to dissuade me on Tuesday, but I would have none of it. No, he must come. Right. Just before... That was your fault.